I would like to introduce to you one of my colleagues who I've worked with for many years. This is Matt Branch, and he is the Associate Director of Student Activities. Matt will then introduce some of the students who are going to talk to you about their experience working in these organizations throughout their student career. Matt?
Thank you, Mikkel. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to the new parents and families who just learned that their students were coming to Brown next year. And then welcome to all of our parents and families who have current Brown students. We're really excited to be talking with you all. Forgive me, this has been my first time in a long time on Zoom and doing a webinar. So I'm just getting through a little bit of the awkwardness. But my name is Matt Branch, he, him, his. And I'm the Associate Director here in the Student Activities Office. I've been working here in the Student Activities Office and at Brown for about 6.5 years. I also did my master's degree here, so I'm also a recent alum. For those of you who don't know, the Student Activities Office supports about 500, a little bit more than 500 student organizations and clubs. Anything that you can imagine: cultural groups, entrepreneurship groups, religious groups, groups that are dedicated to recreation and all sorts of other things. And this year has been a really exciting year for us because we've been able to return to campus. And I know that there's been a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of pent up energy, especially from our first years and sophomores who haven't ever been on campus in a normal year. So we have done a lot. And I'm really excited to be able to be joined here by some of our student leaders. One from each class year, except for we don't have a sophomore, we have a first year, we have a junior, and we have a senior. But I'm really proud of all of the accomplishments the students have achieved this year, and I'm looking forward to sharing what they've been up to. Just a little bit more about our office. So we have about 8 staff members here in the Student Activities Office. And each of our staff members works with a different subset of student groups. So we have a wide range of things for students to choose from. And we also have a wide support team for students to come if they have questions, if they're looking to learn how to build events, if they have projects that they want to get off the ground. So that's a little bit about us. So I'm really excited to now introduce our student panelists, all of whom I've worked very closely with this year. And I'm definitely going to forget some of their affiliations. One thing I'm sure you all know, having being parents and families of Brown students yourself, is that Brown students are involved in a whole lot of things. So I will be highlighting a few of the things that each of the students have been involved in, and they can then fill in some of the gaps. So our first student leader is Ellie Barksdale. She is a junior or soon to be rising senior. Ellie is studying public and international affairs, and she is just fresh off of being one of the 2 student leaders who led Brown Spring Weekend this past weekend, which is our 6,000 person concert series. So she is one of the co-chairs of Brown Concert Agency that organizes that event. And she is also a leader in our Brown Outdoor Leadership Training Program, which takes about 200 students out on a backpacking trip right before the start of the semester, and that the fall semester, and that trip is geared towards sophomores and transfer students and visiting students. So Ellie, do you want to say anything else by way of introduction?
Yeah, sure. Hi, thank you all for coming. As Matt mentioned, I'm Ellie, and I work most closely with Brown Concert Agency and BOLT, which is the Brown Outdoor Leadership Training Trip. I also have been involved with HOPE, which is Housing Opportunities for People Everywhere. It's a housing justice organization, as well as an outdoor leadership program, like mentoring high schoolers, and the John Advising Program, all of those in various capacities. So if you have questions about anything that we've just mentioned, please feel free to let me know.
Thank you, Ellie. So I'll introduce our next student leader. So our next student leader is Mia McKinney. She's a senior. We're going to be saying goodbye to Mia at the end of May. She is concentrating, let me just scroll back up here, in Africana Studies. I knew that, but when you're nervous, you forget. And Mia Mckinney, she's been here only for 3 years. She transferred her sophomore year, but she is one of our leaders in the performing arts area. So she is involved in an a cappella group called Harmonic Motion. She is part of a student-run theater board called Production Workshop, where she's also a liaison to our office, one of the 2 student liaisons that help work between students and staff. She's also done a wide variety of things in terms of stage managing and lots of behind the scenes. She just finished stage managing Sweeney Todd with Brown Opera Productions. And she's also been one of the faces behind our Underground Thursdays performing arts series, which gives students a platform to perform. We were excited to have that return to campus this year, but you all might have seen some of the videos last year of our virtual performances. So Mia, would you like to say anything else by way of introduction?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Like Matt said, my name is Mia Mckinney. I'm a senior. She, her studying Africana Studies, about to graduate. Yeah, so any questions related to any type of theater on campus and the performing arts, I have worked with essentially every theater group on campus, and I'm very involved in the acapella community as well. And I have worked through the student activities office with helping to run the Underground Thursdays, which has been a really great, but during COVID when we had our virtual events, but also since we've been back to campus, a really great opportunity for students who aren't affiliated with a student group to be able to perform and share their art with other students.
Great, thank you, Mia. And our final student panelist is Kelly Way. Kelly is a first year. It's hard to believe. I know my supervisor, our director, and I are always saying, are we sure that Kelly is still a first year? Because it seems like she has just been involved for so long, and she really just has dived right in from her first day here at Brown. So again, Kelly is a first year and she is concentrating in computer science and entrepreneurship. And we've worked most closely with Kelly as the member of the first year president for class coordinating board. And class coordinating board is an elected, a set of elected positions for each class year, first year, sophomore, junior, and senior class board, and they plan class specific events for their class year in order to build community. Class board does class year specific events and also is involved with planning our senior week events, planning gala, which is a large formal that happened a few weeks ago, and class board just is fresh off of planning some really great events as part of our spring weekend, including a carnival event and a student performance event that was in collaboration with Underground Thursdays. So Mia worked on that as well. I know Kelly is also involved in the Chinese Students Association and a bunch of other organizations. So Kelly, would you like to just share any more about yourself?
Sure. Thank you so much for that introduction. Hi again, my name is Kelly, as Matt had mentioned, and I am currently a first year student from New Jersey, and I use she, her pronouns, studying computer science. So yes, one thing that I've been doing this entire year is planning class-wide events, not only for the first year class, but also for all undergraduate students at Brown through class coordinating board, which I strongly encourage you guys look into. But otherwise, I'm also part of the Chinese Student Association, as well as the Brown Taiwanese Student Association as well.
Great, thank you. So I will turn it back to Mikkel, and thank you for organizing this. I know we're all glad to be here.
Yeah, and I know it's just been such a busy time for your office, and especially coming off a spring weekend. And Ellie, I know you had so much to do with that. So you're probably all exhausted. So I really appreciate you guys being here today. So I think, Matt, I have a few rapid fire questions for you, and then we'll get to the students. First off, how do students learn about clubs and sign up to participate at Brown?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it depends on who they are and where they are. So I think now if you're tuning in virtually and your students aren't yet on campus, if you have, what are they, pre-frost or they're coming in September, you can definitely go on to our website, brown.edu/SAO, and take a look at, we have a list of all of the 500 student groups, and they're categorized by, they're alphabetized, but they're categorized by a theme, right? So a cultural identity-based group, a recreation group, a campus services group, community service. And if you go on to that, that sheet, you'll also see that a lot of the student groups have websites that are there on that sheet, so you can check that out. You can see what is going on before you get to campus. You can also email some of the students, so they have public-facing email accounts that are on that sheet. And if you want to find out a little bit more information about those student groups, you could just Google them as well. So some of the student groups have additional Instagram pages, Facebook pages, other social media platforms, and websites. So I would suggest that. Once you are on campus in September, we have an activities fair, which is the first week during the first week of classes. So classes start on a Wednesday and the activities fair is on a Thursday, and is out on the main green. And we have hundreds of student groups out there tabling. So if you or your child, your student is interested, you can take a look there. That is geared towards new students, but all students. So it's also a refresher for students who are coming back and want to get involved in some new activities. And then I'd say word of mouth is always, once you're on campus, is always a great way to find out about activities. I'm always meeting with students who said that they've learned about activities and different ways of engaging from other students. Brown is a campus where there are posters plastered everywhere. So you can always find out about something that's going on. And then there's always social media as well.
Thanks, Matt. You answered, I think, almost all of my questions that I had for you, and a lot that had come in advance from the people joining us. But one question that I don't think you covered was, how are students groups funded at the university?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So we have an undergraduate, so we have 3 branches of government, student government for undergrad. So there's the the Undergraduate Council of Students, which is the set of students which sort of create the laws and the guidelines and things of that nature, work with the policy. We have class coordinating board, of which Kelly is a member, that does the event planning. And then we also have the Undergraduate Finance Board. And so what the Undergraduate Finance Board is, there are 2 chairs and a bunch of other representatives. They are responsible for delegating and distributing the student activities fee that all of the students pay for. So that is amassed. And then the way that they distribute that is student groups that have, that are currently existing. In the spring semester, they will put out a budget request for the Undergraduate Finance Board. A lot of times it's based on things that they've done in the past. So for example, Ellie knows that spring weekend is happening every year. So BCA puts in a budget request for the concerts every single year and some of the other things that they know they'll do. If they have things that will come up during the course of the year that are unexpected, or events that they didn't plan for their budget previously, they can also go in and ask for a supplemental budget request. So those are some ways that student groups are funded. There's also departmental funding. So our department doesn't fund any groups directly, but a lot of academic departments and identity centers will pitch in a little bit here and there for student group endeavors. So those are the 2 major ways that I would say that things are funded. There's also a new activity fee that is jointly funded by the president's office, the provost's office, the dean of the college, and the vice president for campus life office. So funding is available for student and for student group endeavors. It always feels like there's not enough, but there are lots of things that happen here at Brown, and I feel like there's money for students to ask for through student groups if they come with a proposal.
So one thing we haven't mentioned is the impressive number of student groups we have at Brown. What's the current number that we're at? I'm sorry to put you on the spot, Matt, but do you have just a ballpark number?
Sure. So I'm just going to actually, the good thing about being on the computer here is I'm just going to pull up our list of student organizations and just see how many rows there are. We always have new groups coming in. So let's see.
Well, while you're looking for that, why don't you, can you talk a little bit about how a student who would want to create a new group would go about
Sure.
doing that?
Yeah, so, and we have right now about 450 groups, and we know a bunch of new groups have been categorized. So just talking about that process. So there is a process through our Undergraduate Council of Students, and they have a website which we can link, and there's a point on their website for categorization. So if you are interested in creating a new group, you can reach out to the Undergraduate Council of Students. They will want you to have signatures from 10 students, and they will also want to know that the group that you're forming is not too similar to a group that's already in existence. One thing that that we love about Brown students is that they are extremely entrepreneurial, right? And sometimes that means that students will be interested in creating a new group rather than joining an existing group that is really similar. So part of the categorization process is making sure that the new student group is filling a need that isn't already met by another student group. And so then there's a process for that. The student leaders meet with the Undergraduate Council of Students, and if they are determined to meet the qualifications, then they become a new group the next semester.
All right, thank you, Matt. So I think at this point, I know everybody's probably anxious to hear from the students themselves. So if we can throw out some questions to our students, I'm just going to start with, and I'll start with Mia since you're about to graduate. What has been the highlight of your student group experience at Brown?
That's a great question. I think that the main highlight of my time participating in student groups at Brown has definitely been in working in theater, specifically getting to work on different productions where everything is student run. I think it has felt really empowering to feel like myself, along with a group of other students, can come together and execute something that is technically complicated and requires a lot of dedication and work and rehearsal time with other students. I think that has been really special. And at Brown, we have student theater, and there's also theater that's within the TAPS department, the Theater and Performing Arts department, which is an academic department. So the academic theater is completely separate from the student theater, and I've mostly been involved in student theater, and in that we get a lot of autonomy, which I think is really special. And as a part of the board that I'm on, Production Workshop, we also are responsible for maintaining a building on campus called TF Green that is on the south end of campus, where there are 2 theaters that are dedicated to student productions and other types of performance art. And I think being a part of helping facilitate other people also make art has been really special. And I feel really lucky that I've gotten the opportunity to be a part of something that I feel like is greater than myself in my student group work. And I think also it has definitely given me experience that I wouldn't necessarily have at participating in something different, or in being a part of theater that's a little bit more micromanaged by non-students, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you, Mia. Ellie, I'm going to ask you the same question. What has been your highlight so far?
Yeah, I think Mia did a great job of speaking to this idea of working really hard towards something with a group of other dedicated students, and how that made her experience with theater so special. And So I would say for me, that has manifested into like spring weekend, which was last weekend. And it was the first time I've ever done it because I'm a junior. And I remember we planned the whole spring weekend my freshman year and then went home for COVID. So I was in this crazy position of like being in charge of it, but never having attended a spring weekend myself. And there was just a huge learning curve this year in figuring it all out. And so being able to like stand and dance with my fellow board members this past weekend was so special, and I knew it would be rewarding. But I think that like being able to look out into a crowd and see them like enjoying and dancing with their friends while I was dancing with my friends, and just knowing that I had a part in making that happen for people, was really rewarding. So yeah, easily spring weekend was my highlight.
Thank you, Ellie. And Kelly, I know it's your first year, but what's been your highlight in this year?
Well, Ellie could not have said it better, nor could Mia, about the rewarding part of seeing everything come together. So something for CCB that we do, or class coordinating board is the acronym that we go for, is that we plan events so far in advance. So like our gala that Matt had mentioned is our campus-wide formal for undergraduate students. And I actually, like the committee that I was part of, I was co-chair of that committee for gala. We started planning in October. The event was April 9th. So basically the whole entire school year of my freshman year was just spent planning that. And Ellie had talked about like enjoying that experience, or enjoying spring weekend and seeing people have fun because of the hard work that they did, is something that resonates a lot with me, because this is why I continue to plan events, or like enjoy planning and enjoy being part of student government, especially CCB, because of our branch. We plan programming that builds community and gives students like something to look forward to, something to enjoy, because at the end of the day, yes, we're students, but at the same time, we deserve to enjoy some things as well, especially from class-wide events that could be like relaxation, just fun, something to just hang out with friends. So definitely gala was my highlight. Maybe it was the most I've ever planned in my entire life, but definitely so much fun to see everyone having fun with their friends, enjoying the night, and just like regaining some normalcy, because gala hasn't been planned since 2018, like Ellie's spring weekend concerts, and it's just amazing to be back to see things shifting normal again.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point. It's probably going through some people's heads now, is how do you balance your student activity work with your academic work? Kelly, you want to start with that?
Sure. So time management was something that I definitely struggled with this entire first semester. As first year, it's just like adjusting to a new environment and just like being away from home, but definitely relying on like Google Calendar to keep track of all my meetings, and just remembering like which things I should be prioritizing throughout my day has definitely helped with like to-do list, journaling, or not journaling, but like a calendar of just things, so I know when or where I have to be to balance everything, and making sure that I'm also taking care of myself throughout this whole time.
Yeah, that's so important. All right, I'm going to move on to another question that we had about community service. And I can't remember which one of you, or if it was a few, who had some student group experience where it also had a community service element. Does one of you want to speak to that?
I mentioned HOPE, housing opportunities for people.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Okay.
Can you talk a little bit about that and how you've been working in the community?
Totally. So that's a very different experience than my PCA Brown Concert Agency experience, because it's a huge organization. I've never been part of like leadership or anything like that. And there are like many different branches of it, but I have done outreach. And so I honestly started it because I wanted an off-campus federal work study. I think that's the name of it. But I wanted a job, and I also wanted to like be involved with Providence. I just think that if we live here for these 4 years, we should kind of try to understand what it's like beyond the student perspective, because I think it can feel a little skewed. And so part of my outreach group was that every Monday night, we would walk around downtown Providence, but there are different routes that you can take. And we would hand out water bottles and snacks and bars, and just kind of talk to people we met. Sometimes we would submit requests for a sleeping bag or a jacket. And that just kind of became part of my routine. And so Yes, it was community service. It also was just like, I really liked the people in my group. We had a lot of really interesting conversations, and it also feels just like important to me that I can walk down Thayer Street and say hi to people who are there all the time. So I have really, really enjoyed that. And I know there are many ways to get involved with Hope. That's kind of, I think, one of the bigger service groups. And I was not able, like, as you said, with the kind of capacity, I was not able to take on a leadership position for that. But I really, really have enjoyed it. And I know that people who do take on more commitment are, like, have been very much rewarded by that.
Yeah, and that's a great experience. It's so different from your spring weekend planning. So that's a nice counterbalance to that. So we had a question come in. I'm going to direct this to Mia. This must be an alum who was talking about Funk Night from the 80s and 90s. I don't know if does it still exist? I know you're involved with some other events similar to that. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So that's actually really funny. My mom went to Brown in like the late 80s, early 90s, and she always talks about Funk Night, how Funk Night used to happen. I don't believe it happens anymore from what I understand, but I'm pretty sure that it used to happen in the space that is the underground. I'm pretty sure that is where it used to happen, but it
And I
doesn't
think
anymore.
commencement weekend, they'll do a version of it for people who are coming back too.
But I think also part of that, from what my mom has told me, they also it was like when the underground, I think, was like an actual bar, which it's now a coffee shop for the person who's asking about that. So the underground now, there's like a student coffee shop where people make lattes and they sell them to students. So, and that's the same space where we hold our events, which is just where we hold open mics. But no Funk Night anymore, I don't think. I would be down to go though.
Well, maybe Kelly or Ellie can bring it back.
Yeah,
or one of the new students are coming in the fall.
It sounds so fun. I would totally try to help bring back Funk Night.
All right. So we did have another question come in about student athletes, and I don't know if this panel has any insight into, students who are participating and really have a lot of time that they have to spend practicing and competing in their sports. Are they also able to take part in student activities?
I can touch on this a little bit in the sense that, like, for any events that CCB plans, is we usually let students know in advance, hi, we have an event from this time to this time. We would love for you to come if you can. So this is like a classified email that gets sent. So if athletes or students in general have the capacity to come down to wherever we're hosting our event, everyone's usually more than welcome to, and we're not going to restrict anyone from not coming. Usually we know if there's like a specific sports event or like certain games are coming up that may, like, a lot of students may be going to, we'd be mindful of when we're planning, because we don't want to overlap with any events that may be happening. So this goes the same like internally amongst like student organizations. Like if we know, say another student organization has an event this Friday night, our event, like our organization will say, okay, we won't try to plan on that night because we don't want conflicting events, so people can go to both events if possible. So I don't know if that was exactly the question that was being asked in terms of like student groups, but like for events, at least, that is usually how it is, I believe.
Yeah, I can also add. So I think for all of the events that our students are planning, all students are welcome, right? So it's not, there's never a situation where athletes wouldn't be welcome at the event, right? I think sometimes it depends on what their schedule is, right? And that's driven by the type of sport that they're playing. So I know that there might be a busy season, and then a season like our football team is not in season right now, right? So they might have a little bit more availability, where other sports, there's a longer season, right? And I do know that there are also different departmental groups and different department programs that have athlete schedules in mind. So, a few years ago, I, wore a different hat, and I worked with the orientation and welcoming committee. And, we worked really hard to make sure that that it was something that athletes could do as well, because we know that there are challenges with their schedule that make it harder for them to be as flexible as some of the students who are not athletes in terms of their commitments. So, it's definitely something for us to improve on and to continue to think about how we can be more engaging for athletes. And they're always welcome to any events that we are planning.
Thanks, Matt. Oh,
I
go
think
ahead,
also-
Mia.
I'll just add one more thing to this. I think also, like Matt was saying, on kind of people work it out on an individual level, but I've been being a part of a theater production can be time intensive as well. But I've worked on multiple productions where members of the team or members of the cast were athletes, and they were able to make it work with their schedules just by planning and being upfront about their conflicts, and it worked out. So
Great, thanks, Mia. So another question that's come in, and this was also submitted in advance, was about how students are admitted to groups that are performance-based, so like drama groups and dance groups and acapellas. So I think, Kelly, do you want to talk a little bit about the process, in terms of auditions and other ways students are admitted to those groups?
I think Mia could be more qualified in saying things about acapella, but I can share something that's been really helpful for as a first year student. So obviously there's so many information coming at you at once, and it can be overwhelming at times. So one of the things that has been really helpful that Matt had mentioned is the student activities fair that happens in the fall. So I actually was able to attend that event as a first year student, and I got to learn mostly about all of the organizations that I'm a part of. And then I went with friends, so they also found their circles, their interest there as well. And one of the things that they do have, especially for dance groups, there are a lot of booths there saying like, this is our dance group, here is some of the work that we do if you're interested in joining this type of style, and here are our auditions. So most auditions happen early in the fall for that upcoming year. And then if you aren't able to make auditions in the fall, they also have auditions in the spring for the next upcoming school year. So that's just one way for at least first year students. It's also like word of mouth, social media. A lot of student organizations have social media. So chances are if you go on social media and just type up Brown and then some sort of club, something will pop up.
All right, Mia, do you want to speak to the theater groups or the acapella groups?
yeah, sure. So similar to what Kelly's saying, the acapella auditions happen at the beginning of each semester, and there is kind of a consortium of acapella groups that all hold their auditions together. So usually if you get on at least an email list for one of the groups, then you will know when the majority of auditions are happening, which is usually all at the same time in the same building. And you can sign up for different slots if you want to audition for multiple groups. And you can audition for as many groups as you want or as few. So like for instance, when I auditioned, I think I auditioned for almost every group except for maybe two. And then there's a few other a cappella groups on campus as well that aren't a part of that group, that hold their auditions separately, usually a little bit after the rest of us hold our auditions. And they're also at the activities fair, and usually people like sign up to get their name on some type of email list, so they get an email about auditions, but they also are all on social media that can be found on Instagram and Facebook, and they usually publicize their auditions as well. And for theater, the way it works is that anyone can audition for any show that's happening, and those auditions happen at various points throughout the semester depending on when the show is going up. So some happen right at the beginning of the semester, some even happen the semester before, depending on the timeline. Our timelines have been a little bit off than how they were before COVID, but traditionally there are a couple shows that are auditioned the semester before. But then to be on any of the producing boards, there's an application process that happens typically, depending on the group, at least once a semester, sometimes more. And that is basically usually a written application where people apply to be a part of the producing board. But you don't have to be on the board to audition or to have a role on a production team of a show.
Okay. And I don't know, from an outsider perspective, it seems like there's so many performing groups that if there's a student who really wants an opportunity to be on stage in some capacity, that there is an opportunity out there for them. This next question, I want to start with Ellie, but everybody feel free to chime in. And it's about kind of the cycle that a student goes through during their career at Brown with a student organization, especially if you're starting off, I think like you did, Ellie, with, with Spring Weekend, where you're part of the group and then you're rising up in leadership. Can you talk a little bit about that experience, about going from, just a member and then leading a group, and how that has impacted you?
Yeah, so I spent, I would say, the first 2 months of my time in BCA just being terrified of all of the upperclassmen. I was like, they are so cool. They all seem to be best friends. Why would they ever want me here? I just want to be like them. And that I do not recommend, because they were all warm and lovely and truly just wanted me to be there. They were not nearly as scary as they seemed. But I would say I started off being kind of intimidated. And then I think it was through forming connections and also taking on responsibility that I was able to have the sense of okay, I go here, I belong here. And I am a part of this. And I think my journey has been a little distinct just because I was kind of thrown into this leadership position and did a lot of kind of learning as I went. And especially with planning the first spring weekend in 3 years, there's nobody really left on the board who remembers how to do all of the various jobs, even transportation and security and staging, and all of those things need to happen. And usually there are upperclassmen who can say, oh, I did this last year. Let me just show you how it's done. And I'm very much looking forward to kind of rebuilding that institutional knowledge. But I think that in terms of I kind of spread myself amongst various groups freshman year, and then started to see what was most important to me. That ended up being the Brown Concert Agency. And then I started to decide where I wanted to spend most of my time. And then this year has been, very much heavily focused on BCA and a few other things. But I think relying on community has been the thing that has made it easiest to be in a leadership position.
That's very nicely said, Ellie. So Kelly, you're on the starting end of all this. Where do you see yourself going with your student activity work?
Oh, well, actually, next year I will not be serving as the class coordinating board president, but I do hope to return sometime in junior or senior year. But one of the things that was just interesting, my experience compared to Ellie's was just being thrown into the leadership position, not thrown in, but running for the leadership position from the start, because this is something that I really enjoyed in high school. But also the similar feelings of the upperclassmen being really scary. They're really not. They're really, really nice. They know what it's like to be an incoming student, and it's just, they're always welcoming and always helpful to share whatever knowledge that they have. So I just wanted to echo that from Ellie.
Great. And so Mia, since you're on the tail end of it, why don't you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that because at Brown, I think that it's really easy to overcommit yourself, and because there's so many opportunities, just want to get involved at everything that you hear about that sounds fun or exciting. That I think once you really get into it, you have to prioritize the things that are really important to you, like Ellie was saying. And I think that I found that by narrowing my scope a little bit has helped me to really dedicate myself to the things that I have chosen to keep over the years. And I've definitely at certain times had to let some things go. I was on 2 producing boards for a little while, and I had to let one go to make sure that I was not spreading myself too thin. And I think that that is kind of the best way to really be able to have an impact in what you do, and also still enjoy your time and be able to balance your schoolwork as well.
And it looks like, Mia, there's a question for you about what your plans are when you graduate, which I know is always a really pressure-filled question for somebody who's graduating. But I think if you could talk a little bit about how your student activity work might be informing that, that would be great.
Yeah, that is definitely a question I'm getting asked a lot these days. I think my long-term plan currently is to eventually go back to school and become a certified nurse midwife, which is not connected to my student activities work much, but I think that's something I have been going back and forth on. I'm taking a year off next year. My parents want me to uh, get some exposure in the field, make sure it's what I want to do before I go back to school. But I think that my time in student activities and doing a lot of theater work definitely has put working in theater, working in the performing arts on my radar. And it's not something that I'm totally cut off, or not something that I'm totally like, that's totally out of the question for me. I think that it's definitely something I'm still thinking about. And everyone tells me when you're young is the time to work in theater. So we'll see what happens. I think next year I might look into some opportunities to work on a show or two. My parents live pretty close to New York, the city, so we'll see. Maybe I'll find myself there for a little while, but next year is a figuring it out year for me.
Sure. I think that sounds very reasonable. And I don't know, as a parent myself, I can see some connections between theater and what you're planning to do. Let's talk about, I think there's a lot of questions about the time commitment. What would be and maybe Matt, this is a good one for you, is how many groups, is there a recommended number of organizations you should be a part of? Or is there an average that most students do?
I don't know. I think it varies from student to student, and I think our student panelists have really done an excellent job in terms of talking about their journey with different student groups. Ellie just talked a little bit earlier about being involved in more things earlier in her career here at Brown, and then deciding to be able to focus and sort of make a larger impact. And Mia similarly. I think one thing that we try and encourage students to do, they get to Brown having been the best and done it all, and come in already overcommitted, is we often try to help students to find a balance, right? There was a time, and I hope Mia doesn't mind me sharing this, where in addition to all of the different things that she listed, she was also interested in working in our office in a third capacity, because we supervise her in 2 jobs. And I remember having a conversation with Mia and saying, like, do you have capacity for this? Is this something that is going to, diminish your mental health in a certain way, to overcommit? And so she decided, not to take on that responsibility. But I do think it's a journey for students, right? There's also I think different levels of commitment that you can be in with certain groups, depending on what types of groups they are, right? I know with some of our cultural groups, there's like an e-board, and they do a whole lot of work, and then they have a really large set of members who might come to meetings, they might not come to meetings, but are part of the community in a larger way, and part of the group, without always needing to commit at the same level as a president might commit, right? So the 3 students that we have here are ones who are all sort of in the executive board, or in the in the sort of the highest level of some of the student groups that they're involved in, but they also are involved in other things in other capacities, right, in ways that they might not even mention when they list off their affiliation. So I think it's something that is a personal journey for each student. I think if I was at a different type of school, we might be talking about a different average, right? There might be students who don't do anything. I don't really find that that's the case as much here at Brown. But I do see, as the students have talked about, that there is a journey and an ebb and flow to not just the amount of commitments, but the ways in which students are committing, not only to student groups, but to on-campus jobs, to volunteering, to all of the different pieces that, that make up their Brown experience.
Thanks, Matt. So as we near the end of our time together, I want to pose to the students a question about if you could talk to your version of yourself as you were entering Brown, or maybe even just after your first year, and you were getting involved in student organizations. What kind of advice would you give to yourself? And I'll start with you, Kelly.
So I think Matt had pretty much said something that resonated with me. Was that in high school I was overcommitted, and I did about 15 clubs in high school during my senior year, and transferring that to college, where I thought like, okay, if I did it in high school, I could do it again in college. That was something I would not recommend for my first year self, because overcommitment and prioritizing is such an important thing to understand, especially now. It's like before I had trouble with saying no and like overcommitting myself. So to my first year self a couple months ago, I would say it's okay to say no, to make sure that you're not overcommitting yourself and prioritizing things that are really meaningful for you and also won't completely exhaust or drain your energy. So that's something really important, and it's like a incredible lesson that I learned this first year. And I say to any students watching or any parents of students who may have similar situations or experiences with myself, it's okay to say no to something, even though you really want to do it. Prioritizing yourself and making sure that you are not overcommitting yourself is more important than putting less energy into a ton of commitments.
That was very well said. Thank you, Kelly. All right, Ellie, what would you say to first year Ellie?
I totally agree with Kelly. I think that the first year is a great time to kind of get a sense of what's out there. And you can always just like join a club sophomore year. It's not too late. I think someone mentioned that Mia was a transfer, so maybe you can talk more about that later, but it's not like I got involved with Bolt, the backpacking group. It only starts sophomore year. So I think that there's a lot of pressure. And I felt this way with BCA. I got in the beginning of freshman year and I was like, okay, this is my thing. And this is going to be my only thing. And so I would say just take the first year to like see what you like and what you're interested in and what your friends are doing. And also not to put too much pressure on like the very first activities fair, because there's so much more time to figure out what you want to do. And I think that it's most important in the very beginning of freshman year to just like breathe and like make sure your transition is smooth as it can possibly be with all the craziness of freshman year. So don't feel like there's so much pressure to find what you're going to do for all 4 years in the very beginning of your first semester.
Yeah, that's so important, Ellie, I think, because I'm sure there's parents of freshmen and first years and sophomores here with us today. And of course, it's not too late to get involved. There's still so much time to do and explore and find what is meaningful to you. And Mia, I guess I didn't realize you were a transfer student. So why don't you talk about how that worked out for you and how you would talk to Mia, who just arrived on the Brown campus.
Yeah, so I think that when I came to Brown, I was coming off kind of a tough year for me. And I was really determined. And I think part of the reason why my freshman year was a little bit tough was because I wasn't able to do all the things that I like doing, namely singing and doing theater. And so when I arrived at Brown, I was determined to throw myself in immediately. I was like, I want to do as much as I can because this is really important to me. And I know that I am not going to be happy unless I'm doing the things that I love to do in addition to school. And I think now, being 3 years later, I think what I found is that it definitely is important, like Kelly and Ellie were both saying, to find balance and not overwhelm yourself. But I will say, I think that being involved in student activities has been I would say, the most formative part of my time at Brown, and has really, I feel like, allowed me to grow a lot as a person, and has really enriched my experience at Brown in a way that I feel like if I wasn't involved in a similar capacity, then my experience at the school would be very different. And I personally believe that prioritizing things that make you happy and beyond the academic, beyond the classroom is really important to college and helps also find a community of like-minded people. And I think that at Brown there are a number of communities of people who think differently, who are involved in different things. And I think it's really important to get involved with the people who you want to get involved with and who think similarly to you, and that you can share something with, and that is a really important part of the college experience, in my opinion. And I think that at other schools it's not prioritized in the same way that it is at Brown, and that students aren't involved in the same capacity. But I think that it is coming to the end of my time. I think that is some of the best times that I've had at Brown have been engaging with my student groups and being a part of those. And I think that I would not do it any different if I were to go back and start again.
Thank you, Mia. That was wonderful. Matt, do you want to add any last minute thoughts to wrap us up?
No, I think the students summed it up, and they've just done, I mean, these are just 3 of the hundreds of thousands, but hundreds that we work with of student leaders who we continue to learn from and grow with. And it's just really such a privilege to be able to work with such amazing, incredible, thoughtful, intelligent students. And I think, it makes us want to come to work every day. So we're just really proud of the work that the students have accomplished in being a small part in, that process.
Thanks, Matt. Before I close out, I want to say we had another comment in the Q&A upvoting for bringing back Funk Night, another alum. So whoever wants to take that on, there's a lot of enthusiasm for that. But I want to thank Matt and Mia and Kelly and Ellie for taking their time during such a busy time and speaking so eloquently about the student group experience and student activities office. So thank you all.